Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us here on Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle, and this is a show where we talk all things parenting. One of the biggest topics discussed on our Facebook page is rude kids, especially teens. Every generation says this one is ruder than ever before, but is that true? And what can we do about it? Before we delve into the solutions, let's take a look at a survey done by the website Solitaire.
When you think of rude behavior, what does that mean? Not saying please or thank you, swearing, cursing, talking back, or worse. Gaming site Solitaire asked more than 1,400 of their users about kids' rude behavior.
We wanted to learn more about some of the, rude behaviors that were displayed by kids, mainly directed towards their parents, but also just towards other people.
They wanted to find out which cities in the U.S. were rudest and which age groups had the worst behavior. They asked more than 1,400 people in 28 cities. Philadelphia, San Francisco, and New York City came in as the top 3 rudest cities, followed closely by Las Vegas, Columbus, Jacksonville, and Louisville.
So number 1 was being absorbed on their phone. We saw this especially across the older age groups. It was number 1 for both 9 to 12 and also 13 to 17.
The top rude behaviors people reported were being absorbed in their phone, using curse words, and playing videos or music too loud. 49% of the people surveyed said kids are most rude to their parents, and the age group that scored the rudest were teens, 13 to 17 years old. The only outlier was Columbus, that said their toddlers were the rudest age group, mostly due to disobeying the rules. We can't leave out which cities scored lowest in terms of rude behavior. Solitaire said the nicest cities are Nashville, San Antonio, and Portland.
So how do we correct some of this behavior? Dr. Kim Bell is a clinical psychologist with the Hannah Perkins Center for Childhood Development, and she walks us through how to handle rude behaviors. This survey, it was eye-opening and probably not surprising about the rudest behaviors. But I think my first impression, and I don't know if I'm just cynical, but considering it was parents who responded to this, and they all said, yeah, my kids are being rude by being on their phones all the time. Isn't that aren't these the boundaries we should be setting? Are we going wrong somewhere that we are saying that our kids are rude in these ways?
And you feel like you don't have any control over it?
And we don't have any control over it, yes, which I think a lot of parents feel like, I can't get them off their phones.
Right. Well, I think there's a fantasy that we have a lot of control over that. Mm-hmm. And I think that, okay, so let's talk about what you do have control over. Why don't we start there? Yeah. So first of all, you have to start very young. Especially with this group. Keep in mind that the group we're talking about is technology native, mm-hmm. So they've never been born into a world without an iPad or a phone. Mm-hmm. And little kids will start, we're seeing it in preschool, where kids play in the house area and they're on the phone. Okay. Because their parents are on the phone. Mm. And so when we start to see them play as if they are grown-ups, they are on the phone. And it used to be, like this, but now it's like this, like they're playing on the phone. Yeah. And the user interface of our technology is meant for native users. That might be hard to explain, but I have seen a child as young as 3 just whipping through an iPad.
Right, we've all seen that, yeah.
That technology, sort of native growing up with it. So this idea of putting it down or having it not be an important part of your life is sort of this myth of somehow we can go backwards in time. And so there's that piece of it. So you have to start young and be aware of your own technology usage. Like your child is not gonna put their phone away at night if you don't put your phone away at night. And it is also how they stay connected to the world. Okay, so that's starting young, that's the first thing. But then we have parents who are like, oops, I didn't do that, so now what do I do? Right. We have to think back to what we experienced as teenagers. Let's talk about the teenagers, because they're on their phone all the time. Teenagers, it used to be that you had to use the house phone, and you would have that long cord, and you'd hide in a closet, and you would talk to your friends after school, and your parents would be like, get off the phone bill's high. Well, now we have cell phones with unlimited data, and if we were that age, we would be doing exactly the same things our kids are doing now, which is trying to stay in touch with our social support group as much as we possibly can as we are separating emotionally and physically from the adults in our lives. So those friendships feel so important, and to have access to them 24/7 means that the impulse is going to be on the phone the entire time.
Yeah.
I think that you need to start by just having some timeouts with these things. You have to start early. Phones downstairs at night. Plug them in downstairs at night. But that includes the adults, because kids are watching very, very carefully. And I'm afraid gone are the days where you can get away with the type of parenting that says, do as I say, not as I do. It just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking, even if I was a teen and my corded phone went all the way to a restaurant and I'm sitting at the dinner table, out with my whole family, I would have pulled that phone all the way there to be talking on the cord. Those boundaries, when you get resistance, here's what I would be afraid of. Teens like to rebel, especially if a parent's saying, well, no, it's been this way, you've been able to use your phone at dinner, and now we're not going to have, they're taking that away, now you can't use your phone. How do you start these boundaries without having that pushback? Is that possible?
Well, no, you're going to get pushback.
Yeah.
There's always going to be pushback. It's a matter of how big is the pushback. I think one of the things that we also don't have anymore is privacy. Let's talk about the fact that we don't have privacy.
Right.
There are too many videos up on YouTube. There are too many videos. You can Google anything and you can see it. And I talk to parents about this, because it's often parents who are putting these videos up of their kids. And so there isn't the same expectation of privacy. And the reason that's important is because I think too many of us have seen the videos of kids just falling out, like a real teenager tantrum when their phones get taken away. They're throwing things, they're kicking things, and parents get scared. That's an addictive response. That isn't usually how kids behave, but because we put everything up on the internet, it's what we see. And so parents, I think, are afraid that their kid is going to display this really outrageous behavior.
Yeah.
The majority of kids who don't have that kind of an addictive response can handle, they're going to get mad at you. I mean, they're just going to be mad, and they're going to, whatever, they're going to sulk, they're not going to talk to you, they're going to whatever. But if you're starting if you're going to start a new behavior, let's talk about just doing it in bearable bits. So you can have your phone the last 15 minutes of dinner. You can have your phone, don't just say, that's it, we're done. We have a new rule in this family that after 6 p.m. our phones are going away. That's never going to happen. Never going to happen. You're going to end up in a power struggle, because that child is going to find a way to sneak their phone, and then you're going to be like, oh, take it away for 2 days, and then that's a disaster. And then you realize you can't take it away for 2 days because they have to do homework on it.
Yeah.
Or they have a group chat where they're working on a group project. There's all these reasons why technology is necessary. So if you're going to introduce something really new, you have to introduce it in bearable bits, whether that's 15 minutes at a time, 30 minutes at a time, and build the tolerance, because we are all addicted to our phones, all of us.
Yep. I'm thinking about how I even have my phone in the ready at dinner, like within arm's reach, even if I put it away, just because what if my husband calls? What if my mom calls? What if,
Right.
So I have to start to mirror that behavior. You brought up two things that kind of leads into one of the other rudest behaviors, which is gossiping. And when we have our social circles within reach, within our phones at all times, and then also you mentioned no privacy. I feel like gossiping, that just lends to even more gossiping in this generation than what we experienced as teens. How do we approach gossipy behavior if we're seeing our child being gossipy and we don't want them to have that behavior? It's a little trickier now. It
is trickier now, because you have to take a look at how much reality TV you're watching, because that's the whole premise of all of those shows.
Yeah.
Like, how much of those kinds of shows are you watching? How much do you personally enjoy them? And the other thing I think we don't do is these questions are asked, like, how do I get my teen to do this? How do I get my teen to do that? How do I get my kids to do this? My first question is, well, what did they say when you talked to them about it? And a lot of parents will be like, well, I haven't actually talked to them about it because I don't know what to do about it. And I'm like, okay. So we want to separate this idea of compliance and control with understanding and influence. I made that up, but let's do it that way, right? Those are words I just made up. To sort of separate this idea of, well, I have to make my teenager do something. Good luck. If you try to make your teenager do something, what's happening is you're trying to maintain control at a time when your teenager is trying to push off and be ready to be their own person in the world. And so there is a natural tendency for things to clash. Teenagers go against family norms, they try things out, they push the boundaries. Your job is to be like those bumpers in bumper bowling, and sort of like swoosh them back into the center of where you want them to be. But if you are under this idea of like, well, I can somehow get compliance and control and quiet, you're not going to get what you want, especially not with this generation. So you have to focus more on understanding what's happening. So gossip makes people feel like they are part of a group, and teenagers want to be part of a group because they are separating from their original family unit and they need something to grab onto. The visual that I always use is this idea of like when you're in a pool and you push off from the side, you're floating for a little bit and that feels great, but then you want some stability, you want to put your feet down or grab the side. And when teenagers are doing that, they're grabbing onto peer groups, celebrity, social norm, being TikTok famous, anything that makes them feel less alone and more understood. So you have to come and connect with your teenager from a place of expecting the best from them.
It makes total sense. I'm going to lump in some of the rudest behaviors that were listed out separately in this survey. But to me, this all makes sense to lump them together. Some of the other rude behaviors that people complained about were not making eye contact, not saying hello, ignoring people, which to me is a social skill set, which also seemed to be like, well, if we have our phones in our face all the time and we're used to interfacing on a screen, that's really difficult to get them to do those things in person. So is there a way to influence them? Like what kind of training are we doing at home?
So here's what I would do. I would start as young as possible, because it is true, if you spend most of your time communicating like this idea of having to lift your head up to communicate face to face, a lot of kids are reporting these days this social anxiety. We see an increase in social anxiety. And we really felt it during COVID, because it was great that kids could go to class on Zoom. But what we found is that so many kids were having social anxiety because they're used to sitting in a classroom where there's a person behind them and a person in front of them. But when you're on Zoom, everybody's staring in your face. And they felt really observed and watched. And so they would turn their cameras off, and then teachers felt like they were being ignored. Like there was this whole thing about making eye contact. It's going to sound like a silly recommendation, but you have to find your teachable moments where they exist. So starting as young as you can, when you go out to dinner, have your child give their own order. Like talk to the wait staff, have them order their own thing at McDonald's, wherever it is you happen to be, have them do the job. Have them order the pizza, whatever it is that they can do to interact, instead of we're usually in a very big hurry these days. And so to have a child who's 7, 8, 9, 10, kind of stumbling over their words or getting nervous about it, again, at Hannah Perkins, we're always talking about doing for, doing with, and standing by to admire. And that includes social skills. So at first you're doing for, you're setting up play dates, you're doing all of these things for them. And then doing with them is really about letting them do the pieces and parts that they can do. And we have to be more intentional about that with this generation, because they don't have as much natural social contact because they do so much of it online and on their phone. And so we need to sort of find opportunities to practice with them their social skills.
Yeah. Well, and with teens though, because I even just over the weekend met a very sweet teen, but clearly had trouble looking at an adult in the face and in the eye, and you know, they were blushing and they were turning bright red, and it was a struggle. And I'm thinking this teen will totally figure it out in the next couple of years. But then again, teens, if they are struggling with these social skills, they have to go on job interviews. They're going to have to maybe even in college be interfacing with professors without mom and dad there. For teens, where they're further down the road, is there a way to help get them to that point? Because we just talked about the younger kids.
I would do the exact same thing. I think start where you are and start in bearable bits. Because you're right, we don't want a teenager to, you know, kind of go out there looking for a job and not be able to manage themselves in an interview. I'm a fan of youth groups. I'm just a huge fan of youth groups for teenagers, or being involved in sports, being involved in yearbook. I don't care what kind of a club it is. It gives them a non-technological social outlet, and I'm a fan of those, whether they're in school or out of school. They don't need to be scheduled from the time they get up to the time they go to sleep, but anything that gives them an opportunity to interact with like coaches or advisors, because that's really the practice they don't have. This particular generation doesn't have as much exposure to interacting with adults outside the family. And the more we can give them that opportunity. So if they're on a team and they need to have a conversation with the coach, instead of you jumping in and doing for, do with. And then stand by to admire. The stand by to admire phase is important because they're the ones that are initiating the conversation with their teacher, with their counselor, with some kind of an adult. But you're there. You're physically there, standing by to admire, meaning that there's like a safety net for them. And I think sometimes, especially when we're busy, we have a tendency to go from doing for, maybe a little bit of doing with, and then the minute they show some independence, we're like, great, gotta go.
Yeah.
I'm late for this or I'm late for that. And so sometimes we miss that step. But we just have to be more intentional, so you can do that with a teenager.
Yeah. Finally, the survey was talking about the younger age group, and some cities said the younger age group was the rudest, and it was more about disobeying the rules. And I'm picturing, when I read that, I was picturing like, you know, we're at the park and you're going, no, you know, Timmy, don't go up the slide the wrong way. And then the kids just blatantly look at you and go, okay, mom. And then they go up the slide. When it is that type of behavior consistently, what is it that parents can do? Like I always say, well, I go into mean Italian mom mode, but you know, what is it that we're supposed to be doing to get them to know what the rules are and then obey the rules at that young age?
Okay, so kids ages 5 and up have learned how to lie. It's a big thing to learn how to lie. Like, oh, I can say something that's not true. And so they practice it a lot. And so you'll find them cheating at games and you'll find them lying. These are developmentally appropriate behaviors.
Okay, good, because I have one that does that all the time.
Oh yeah, they cheat, they lie. And it's I could go in deeper, but it's part of aggression and all kinds of other things that are going on developmentally. But essentially what we want to do is we want to not let them get away with it. And at the same time, have these teachable moment conversations about why were you just doing that? You know, because kids have a hard time losing. As soon as they hit 5 or 6, they start to really feel like I'm bad if I lose. And so you'll see this kind of pushback. And if you can have conversations about that, like everybody loses. You know, everybody loses. Everybody's friend says they don't want to play with them. Everybody has a bad moment. Nobody's perfect. You are right and perfect just the way you are, with all of your flaws. You don't have to be, you know, everybody's favorite, or you don't have to be all of these things. So we have to start there. And I think kids are little mimics, and so you have to know what they're watching. I hate to harp on technology today, but we are. Because if they see rude behavior, then they are going to behave in rude ways. If they see kids breaking the rules and it's funny because it's on a YouTube video or something, then they are going to mimic what they're seeing. So you have to be very careful about what you're letting your younger kid watch, because it's going to fly in the face of potentially, things that you want.
Right.
And then it's a matter of safety. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if you get loud every time they break the rules, then you're just somebody who gets loud. If you reserve your loud for one trial learning, like touching a hot stove, we know. Running up a slide, if there's kids coming down, one trial. So then when you raise your voice, they're like, oh, that's serious.
Right.
And it's just going to happen. Like there's no perfect way.
Yeah.
And you're never going to get 100% compliance, never.
Right. No, I don't even comply still, 100%. So can't expect that out of the kids. Kim, thank you so much. This was so many actionable items and ways to think about how our kids are developing. So thank you so much. A huge thank you again to Dr. Kim Bell with the Hannah Perkins Center for Childhood Development. And thanks to all of you for tuning into Mom Squad. Remember, you can join us on our Mom Squad with Maureen Kyle Facebook page. See you right back here next time.